This is my first time in Berlin, and I apologize. There is a running joke in the Labour Party that I never leave my constituency. And I always tell people I never leave the country because I'm not sure if the Conservatives will let me back in. I want to thank for the invitation. I want to thank the LINKEN, but also I'd like to thank the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation for the support they've given us in the UK. It's been invaluable. I want to talk about two things as briefly as I can. First of all, I want to update you on the situation in the UK, the general political and economic situation, and the position in the Labour Party, particularly the position of the left. And then I'd just like to discuss very briefly the sort of range of issues we all face and the options before us for the role that we could play as socialists. Let me just turn to the UK. We're now in our 13th year of austerity under Conservative governments. We said it at the time, austerity is not an economic necessity, it's a political choice. And when we had the banking crash in 2007, 2008, the Conservative government that was elected then basically took the view, don't let the crisis go to waste. And they seized the opportunity, well, first of all, introduce a large-scale programme of austerity, reduce the state, cut wages, and by cutting taxes on the corporations and the wealthy to redistribute wealth upwards. So we've had year after year of cuts in state expenditure, and they've left our public services in crisis. Just to give the example, this winter, our National Health Service is in an emergency situation. It's breaking down, unable to cope with the volume of patients pouring into our hospitals. We have ambulances queuing up outside hospitals, unable to discharge their patients because there are no beds left in the hospital. People are actually dying in those hospitals. The accident and emergency wards, they've been described by some as something out of a war zone. Social care has been privatised and has collapsed. There are massive staff shortages because of low pay. There's an independent report this month that assessed that 500 people are dying a week because of the emergency delays that are taking place. The same crisis is impacting on our schools, our universities and our local councils. In fact, many of our local councils are on the edge of bankruptcy. Just on wages, austerity combined with a failure to invest and improve productivity has resulted in 13 years of wage cuts and wage freezes. Average weekly wages are barely above the level of 2008 in the UK. And the result is exactly in Germany, but possibly worse, growing poverty and hardship. Many of our workers now have to rely upon food banks, charitable distribution of food. And these people are nurses and teachers and civil servants, traditionally classed as professions, but they're now in the food bank queues. We have a particular problem and heart-rending problem of child poverty, with many children going hungry and some starving in the 5th largest economy in the world. We have inflation at over 10%, food inflation, partly because of, yes, the Ukraine, but mainly as a result of food speculation on the international markets. We now have at levels between 14 and 16% inflation. And in some sectors, like the railways, workers haven't had a wage rise for 4 years. So it's understandable why many workers in the UK now are turning to their unions to protect them from the ongoing wage cuts. And in union after union, workers are voting for industrial action, for strikes. We have the most restrictive trade union laws in Europe. They were introduced by Mrs. Thatcher with the aim of shackling the trade unions and preventing them having the power to represent their members. But the laws make it extremely difficult to secure a majority in favour of votes. Nevertheless, with the overwhelming support of their trade union members, we have strikes in the privatised postal services, in railways, on buses, in our NHS. For the first time in our history, nurses are striking. They've been joined by ambulance drivers, the junior doctors are now balloting for strike action, and the major civil service union has also this week announced a strike of 100,000 civil servants in February. We've also got ballots for firefighters, teachers, all calling for strike action. Many of our unions are now coordinating their strikes as well, working together to maximise their impact. In the private sector, there's been a series of huge victories, particularly for Unite the Union. in securing inflation-proof pay rises. And what's been demonstrated, exactly as you've experienced too, is where people are determined and they're willing to take action with effective trade union leadership and political support. Workers are mobilising at a scale and victories are being won. And in turn, each victory is inspiring others to take action too. I just want to assess the political response very briefly to the current crisis. And one needs to appreciate the bizarre, at times weird political times that we've gone through. Dario Fo couldn't have written a better farce than what we've experienced over the last 12 months. We've had 3 prime ministers in 12 months. Johnson was elected as a result of a sort of Trump-like populist campaign on Brexit, toxic mixture of nationalism and racism, and supported very right-wing media spewing out lie after lie about Europe and life after Brexit. You have to accept that Johnson is a congenital liar. His inaction and incompetence during the COVID crisis cost us many lives. Eventually, his behaviour and his mendacity caught up with him. And as you know, he was followed by possibly the most incompetent and certainly the most short-lived Prime Minister in British history, Liz Truss. Within weeks of her taking over, her first budget created an economic crisis of confidence in the international markets, and the cost of borrowing for the UK shot up and caused an economic crisis across the piece. There's a real sense of irony because when I was Shadow Chancellor, the media would always allege that if I was elected, there would be a run on the pound. Actually, Liz Truss did more to undermine British capitalism than I ever could in terms of the policies that we were advocating. And we now have Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister, multi-millionaire, made his money in the finance sector, so out of touch with reality that he's desperately trying to steady the ship unsuccessfully. Sunak has 2 years to the next election. Though Sunak has a small personal rating lead over Keir Starmer, nevertheless, we believe there's the prospect of a Labour government. The question for us is, if elected, what will that Labour government do? Starmer was elected leader on a platform based upon support for the continuation of our own manifesto policies that were developed under Jeremy and myself, and also on building party unity. Now, regrettably, Starmer has made it clear that many of those policies are no longer to be adhered to. There's been a distinct lack of policy announcements from the Labour Party. When there has been a policy announced, it's largely been a watered-down, weakened version of the policies of our last manifesto. And the strategy has been for Keir to distance himself from anything associated with Jeremy's leadership. And so where even a policy is announced that's has its origins under Jeremy and me, there must never be any attribution to us. In fact, I'm thinking of suing them for copyright. It's a bit like being photoshopped out of a historical photograph. Does that ring any bells? It's also actually one of personal tragedy that Keir Starmer has withdrawn the party whip from Jeremy, with the result he may be barred from standing as a Labour MP at the next election. Membership of the party has declined by over 200,000 members and possibly many more. And unfortunately, Starmer has refused to back the current strikes. His line is that he supports the right to strike, but he's tried to bar Labour MPs from appearing on picket lines of the striking trade unionists. Needless to say, most Labour MPs have ignored that. They've gone onto the picket lines, and we've been proud to show solidarity with those workers in struggle. Despite a lack of policy and the inability of Starmer to personally break through, it is still likely that Sunak won't be able to recover the Tory support and win the next election, and there will be a Labour government. The question is, what size of the majority will Labour have? The strategy of the left has largely been to remain within the party, and we've been aiming at, first of all, securing the left parliamentary representation we have in Parliament already, and we've managed to do that in most occasions. Most of the left MPs who are members of the Socialist Campaign Group have now been reselected and will be standing successfully again at the next election. But the influence of the left will obviously be dependent on the Labour majority or whether it's a hung parliament. And so the left could have a significant determining role after that election. The second role that we've taken is participating prominently in every union struggle and engaging in solidarity in the numerous progressive campaigns on a wide range of issues, from the environment to bread and butter issues like housing and rents and debt and tax justice. The third role we determined was to continue leading and winning the intellectual arguments about the analysis of our society and our economy and the development of alternative progressive policy programs. And fourth, obviously, the task that we play is developing and recruitment and training of the next generation of cadres to develop the next wave of socialist advance within the Labour Party and our society overall. Let me briefly just finally turn to the common issues that we all face and the potential approaches that I think we have. The economic backdrop is pretty clear. The World Bank this week, you saw, reported that the global economy, and I quote, is on a razor's edge, risking falling into recession. It lowered its growth forecast to both the advanced countries and to the emerging markets. The IMF issued similar warnings that a third of the global economy would be in recession. So that means that in the current decade would become the first decade since the 30s to experience 2 recessions. It's argued that even if the Eurozone doesn't technically fall into a recession, for most people it will certainly feel like a recession. If the central banks predictably resort to interest rates rises to contain inflation, times will get increasingly tougher. So from the lesson from the decade of austerity, that as socialists, we have a key role, and it's reflected in the paper that's presented today. We have a key role in explaining this capitalist crisis, in mobilising the labour and trade union movements in all our countries to ensure that this time it's not the workers who will be forced to pay the price of this crisis. And further thought now, as you've done today, needs to be given to how we present a credible, popular analysis of the present crisis and a clear core alternative programme that we can be campaigning on. I want to raise the issue of migration as well. Every period of recession and economic crisis has provided an opportunity for the right to rise up from the gutter. Racism is always at the heart of these movements. The wars in Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, and the persecution in Iran, the poverty, the increasing impact of climate change across the global south, all these are push factors forcing people to travel across the planet to find safety and security. These people become the targets, they always are, of the right, and they are seen as an opportunity for the right to breed the politics of division. And we're witnessing it in all our countries, and I will look at with special trepidation, for example, what's happening in Austria. As socialist humanitarians, we have a duty to stand by and stand up for the rights of asylum seekers. There should be no compromise with the right and with these racists. They stain our societies. This campaign, and it is this campaign that crosses all borders. So we need to consider what joint actions we can take together in this current period. Again, on climate change can't be addressed by individual nations alone. It was in the UK, just as in Germany, we now have a government that's reopening coal mines. It's staggering. Just at a time when we thought there was a growing appreciation in national governments across the globe of the desperate need for urgent action to restrain global warming, and just at the time we thought the floods and the fires and extreme weather events had convinced us all of the imminence of this threat, our governments are retreating into the sort of catastrophic errors of past years. Dangerous decisions are being made, and that's why, as socialists, we must play our part in alliance with all those others who are taking action to prevent this lunacy, including direct action, whatever means is necessary. The international networks, I think, of socialist movements can significantly contribute to building the global environment movement that we need. Finally, let me just, in conclusion, I want to thank you for letting me participate. You can see I firmly believe that as socialists we have a vital role to play in the political and intellectual struggles ahead, and I believe we have a unique experience built up over not just decades, but over centuries, to understand the world, how to mobilise and how to bring about change. And I think what's needed is just continuing enthusiastic determination, ongoing creativity, but above all else, international solidarity upon which our movement was founded and built. Solidarity.